You're not broken, but I understand why it feels that way. You made it through something that was supposed to destroy you, and now, on the other side of it, you're still here. Except you're not quite here, are you? You react to things that shouldn't matter this much. You go numb in moments that should move you. You flinch at things other people don't even notice. You wake up exhausted from a night that was supposed to be rest. You love people and still can't fully reach them. You know rationally that you're safe, and yet your body refuses to believe it. So you did what you were told to do. You talked about it, maybe for years, maybe with good people, in good rooms, with the right intentions, and some of it helped, but something didn't move. The story is there, but the weight is still there too, and nobody explained why. Bessel van der Kolk is a psychiatrist who built his career around that exact question, not what happened to you, but what happened inside you. After decades of brain scans, clinical work, and research that turned his entire field upside down, he arrived at a conclusion that changes everything. Trauma is not a memory that needs to be reprocessed. It is a physical reorganization of your nervous system. And a nervous system that has been reorganized by trauma does not respond to understanding. It responds to experience. That distinction is not subtle. It is the difference between spending years trying to think your way out of something your body has been carrying without your permission, and finally learning how to speak the only language your nervous system actually understands. In this video, we're going to look at exactly what trauma does to your brain. Not in theory, but in the specific structures that got rewired. And then we're going to go through the process by which those structures learn, slowly and repeatedly, that the danger is over. You didn't fail to heal. You were just given the wrong tools. Shame is a bad diagnosis, and for most people who carry trauma, it is the first one they give themselves. You tell yourself you are overreacting, that other people went through worse and turned out fine, that you should be over it by now, that the problem is something in your character, a softness, a weakness, a fundamental defect in how you were made. And the longer the symptoms persist, the more convinced you become. Van der Kolk spent years scanning traumatized brains, and what he found doesn't support any of that. The traumatized brain is not a broken brain. It is an adapted brain. It reorganized itself around a threat that existed at a specific moment in your life, and it has been operating from that reorganization ever since, because no one gave it sufficient information that the context had changed. To understand what that means, you need to know three structures. The first is the amygdala. Van der Kolk calls it the brain's smoke detector. Its job is to scan incoming information and flag anything that resembles a past threat. In a non-traumatized brain, the amygdala fires, the body mobilizes, and then, once the danger passes, the alarm quiets. In a traumatized brain, the amygdala has been recalibrated. It fires faster, more intensely, and on far less evidence. A tone of voice, a specific smell, someone standing too close. Your amygdala processes that input before your conscious mind even knows it arrived. And by the time you register what happened, your body is already in emergency mode. The second structure is the medial prefrontal cortex. Van der Kolk calls it the watchtower, the part of the brain that looks down at the alarm and asks, is this an actual fire or just smoke from the stove? In a traumatized brain, trauma reduces activity in this region. The watchtower goes dim, so the smoke detector fires and nobody authoritative is there to say, stand down. The alarm runs. The third is the thalamus, the brain's integrator, the structure that weaves together sensory input into a coherent, time-stamped experience. This is happening now, in this context, and it will end. Trauma disrupts thalamic function. When a traumatic memory surfaces, the thalamus can fail to stamp it as past. The sensations arrive without a timestamp. Your nervous system experiences them as current. This is why a flashback does not feel like remembering. it feels like happening. Van der Kolk documented this in The Scanner. When traumatized patients were exposed to scripts of their own traumatic experiences, Broca's area, the brain's speech center, went offline. The region that processes visual threat reactivated as though the event were occurring in real time. The left hemisphere, responsible for sequencing and narrative, deactivated. The right hemisphere flooded with sensation, image, and emotion, but with no context, no timeline, no story. This is what your nervous system has been doing, protecting you, using every circuit it has, not failing, adapting. The cost of that adaptation is real. A smoke detector calibrated to maximum sensitivity saves your life in a burning building. In a kitchen, it makes cooking unbearable. Your amygdala doesn't know the building stopped burning. It only knows what it learned. The question, then, is not what is wrong with you. It is how you give your nervous system the information it was never given, that the threat is over, and that you are here. Not there, not then, but here, now, in a body that is capable of learning something new. That learning starts with understanding the space inside which it can actually happen. And it is much narrower than you think. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. You know the feeling. Something happens. A raised voice, an unexpected message, someone pulling away without explanation. And you go from zero to unbearable in seconds, or the opposite. Something happens that should matter enormously, and you feel nothing. You sit in front of people you love, and you are behind glass. Present in body, absent everywhere else. Both of these are the same problem, wearing different faces. Van der Kolk borrows a term from the psychiatrist Daniel Siegel, the window of tolerance. It describes the range of arousal inside which your nervous system can function. The zone where you can feel without being overwhelmed, think without shutting down, and stay in your body without needing to leave it. Inside that window, experience is processable. You can take something in, sit with it, and respond. Outside it, your nervous system goes into emergency mode, and the only options available are the ones trauma already installed: explode, collapse, or disappear. Trauma doesn't just hurt you, it shrinks that window. Van der Kolk studied two patients who were in the same car during the same accident. Stan, when reminded of it in the scanner, flooded. His heart rate spiked, his body sweated, his brain lit up on the right side and went dark on the left. He relived it. Ute, in the same machine, exposed to the same script, went blank. Her brain activity dropped across nearly every region. Her heart rate didn't change. She felt nothing. When they asked her how she'd experienced the scan, she said, "I felt just like I felt at the time of the accident. I felt nothing." Stan was above his window. Ute was below it. Trauma had pushed them both outside the zone where healing is possible, in opposite directions. You may recognize yourself in one of them. You may oscillate between both in the same day. The hyper-aroused state keeps you locked in alarm, hyper-vigilant, reactive, unable to distinguish real threats from pattern matches your amygdala made years ago. The hyper-aroused state keeps you in shutdown, slow, numb, disconnected from your own body, unable to access the emotions that would tell you what you need. Van der Kolk describes people in chronic shutdown as having learned to deal but not feel, or in the opposite pattern, to feel but not deal. Swamped by emotion, they cannot regulate. Neither state is weakness. Both are your nervous system doing the only thing it knows to do when the window has been compressed past the point of function. The goal of recovery is not to eliminate your responses. It is to expand the window so that more experience can pass through it without triggering emergency mode. That expansion happens gradually through repeated contact with sensation that your system can tolerate. Not sensation that overwhelms, and not the avoidance that keeps you frozen. The narrow band between too much and nothing is exactly where the work lives. Before that work can happen, though, you need to understand why the tool most people reach for first, language, narrative, the act of talking it through, so often leaves the deepest thing untouched. Trauma, van der Kolk writes, is pre-verbal by nature, not metaphorically, neurologically. When his team scanned traumatized patients at Harvard while those patients listened to scripts of their own worst experiences, one finding stopped them. Broca's area went offline. Broca's area is the speech center of the brain, the region that converts internal experience into words. During a flashback, it deactivates. The mouth can move, but the part of the brain that links sensation to language has temporarily shut down. Van der Kolk quotes Macbeth on it. "O horror, 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 tongue nor heart cannot conceive nor name thee." Shakespeare, it turns out, was describing a neurological event. This is why so many survivors of trauma can tell you the story of what happened, calmly and in sequence, and still feel completely untouched by the telling, or why others break down before they get 3 sentences in, overwhelmed by sensation that the words were supposed to organize but instead unleashed. The story is not the trauma. The trauma lives in the body, in the nervous system, in the sensory fragments that arrive without context or timestamp. Talking accesses the left hemisphere, the part that sequences, explains, and narrates. The trauma lives on the right, in images, in physical sensations, in emotion that predates language entirely. Van der Kolk is careful here. He does not say that talking is useless. He says that talking to the rational brain cannot override what the emotional brain has encoded in the body. No amount of insight, he writes, will silence the alarm bell of the emotional brain. The veteran who understands, in precise clinical terms, exactly why he flinches at a car backfiring, the understanding does not stop the flinch. The woman who has spent years in therapy constructing a coherent narrative of her childhood understands what happened. Her body still freezes when someone raises their voice. Comprehension and regulation are not the same process. They do not live in the same part of the brain. The talking cure, as Freud named it, was built on a belief that bringing the traumatic memory into consciousness and narrating it would discharge the emotional charge attached to it. For some experiences, at some intensities, that works. But van der Kolk's brain scans showed what happens when it doesn't. The rational brain watches, helpless, while the emotional brain runs the show. The prefrontal cortex can observe the alarm. It cannot turn it off from the outside. The only path into the emotional brain runs through the body itself, through sensation, through breath, through movement, through the physical experience of being safe in a body that has not felt safe in a very long time. This is not a critique of therapy. It is a map of what therapy needs to reach. Talk is the surface. Beneath it is a nervous system that learned something in conditions of terror, and that nervous system will not update its learning through conversation alone. It will update through experience. Repeated, embodied, tolerable experience that contradicts, at the level of sensation, what the trauma taught it to expect. The question is what that experience looks like in practice. And that requires understanding the direction from which healing actually arrives. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Recovery does not begin in the mind. It begins in the body, specifically in the signals you send to a nervous system that has been running on threat for so long it has forgotten what baseline feels like. Van der Kolk identifies 2 directions from which those signals can travel. The first is top-down, strengthening the capacity of the prefrontal cortex, the watchtower, to observe what the body is doing without being swept away by it. Mindfulness works this way. When you pay deliberate attention to what you are feeling in your body, you activate the medial prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that notices internal states. Van der Kolk calls this interoception, looking inside. Research by his colleagues at Harvard showed that even practicing mindfulness consistently reduces activity in the amygdala, the smoke detector itself. The watchtower gets stronger, the alarm fires less easily. The second direction is bottom-up, going beneath cognition entirely and working directly with the autonomic nervous system through breath, movement, and touch. This is where the evidence becomes striking. Van der Kolk and his team conducted a study in which traumatized patients who had failed to respond to medication, to talk therapy, and to every other available treatment were given 10 weeks of yoga practice. Their PTSD symptoms dropped significantly, not because yoga is spiritual, but because it is physiological. Approximately 80% of the fibers in the vagus nerve, the nerve that connects the brain to the heart, the lungs, and the gut, run from the body upward into the brain, not the other way around. Slow, deliberate breathing activates the parasympathetic brake on the nervous system. The body sends the message upward. The danger is not happening right now. Do it repeatedly, in a body that can tolerate the sensation, and the nervous system begins to update its baseline. What makes this difficult is that traumatized people are often afraid of their own bodies. The body became a place of danger, of sensation that arrived without warning and with no off switch. The impulse to leave the body, to dissociate, to numb, to stay in the head where things feel more controllable, is not avoidance in the pejorative sense. It is a learned survival strategy. And it worked. The problem is that healing requires going back into the body, incrementally and safely, because the nervous system only updates through felt experience. You cannot think your way into a new physiological baseline. You have to feel your way there. Van der Kolk describes the process as pendulation, moving gently in and out of contact with internal sensations and difficult material, never staying long enough to be overwhelmed, always returning to something stable. A breath, the sensation of your feet on the floor, the weight of your body in the chair. These are not poetic metaphors for presence. They are neurological anchors. When the watchtower goes dim and the smoke detector fires, a concrete physical sensation in the present moment can interrupt the loop. Not permanently, not dramatically. Enough. And enough, repeated over time, is how the window of tolerance begins to expand. Peter Levine, whose work Van der Kolk cites directly, describes the goal as completing what trauma interrupted. When an animal survives a predator, it shakes, a full-body discharge of the survival energy that was mobilized and then didn't get to complete its action. Humans suppress that discharge because social life requires it, because the trauma happened in a context where shaking was not safe, because the body learned to hold it in. What somatic practice does, at its core, is create conditions in which that completion can finally happen. Van der Kolk calls it the pleasure of completed action, a phrase from Pierre Janet, writing in 1893. He still uses it because nothing more precise has replaced it. When a patient physically rehearses what the trauma prevented them from doing, pushing back, running, standing, something in the nervous system relaxes, not as insight, as relief. The practical implication is simpler than it sounds. You do not need a specialized clinic to begin. You need to find a form of physical practice that keeps you inside your window of tolerance. One that asks you to notice what you feel in your body without flooding, and to stay with it one breath longer than you did yesterday. Yoga is one path. Rhythm and movement are others. The specifics matter less than the principle. Your nervous system learns from experience, and the experience it needs is the felt sense that it is safe to be inside your body right now. That sense cannot be argued into existence. It has to be built, slowly, one tolerable moment at a time. But even that is not enough on its own, because the nervous system did not develop in isolation, and it cannot heal in isolation either. There is a reason you feel calmer around certain people and more agitated around others without being able to explain why. Your nervous system is reading theirs. This is not intuition in the loose sense, it is biology. The psychiatrist Stephen Porges, whose work van der Kolk draws on extensively, identified what he called the social engagement system, a set of neural circuits that evolved specifically to detect safety or threat in other human beings, operating through the tone of a voice, the muscles around the eyes, the micro-movements of a face. Your nervous system is scanning the people around you constantly, below conscious awareness, asking one question: is it safe to be here with this person? A regulated nervous system in close proximity to a dysregulated one pulls it, gradually, toward calm. This is called co-regulation. It is how human beings have managed arousal since before language existed. Van der Kolk is direct about what this means for recovery. Study after study, he writes, shows that having a reliable support network constitutes the single most powerful protection against being traumatized. And after trauma has already set in, the relational context is not supplementary to healing. It is the medium through which healing travels. Traumatized human beings recover in the context of relationships, with families, loved ones, therapy groups, religious communities, or individual therapists. The role of those relationships is not primarily to provide insight or advice. It is to provide a nervous system that is regulated enough to borrow from. The cruelty of interpersonal trauma, abuse, neglect, violation by someone who was supposed to protect you, is that it destroys precisely this resource. If the people you were supposed to turn to for safety were the source of the danger, your nervous system did not learn that other people regulate you. It learned that other people destabilize you. So you adapted. You learned to need less, to trust less, to keep people at a distance that felt like protection. And it was protection. But that same distance now keeps your nervous system locked in the very isolation that sustains dysregulation. This is why isolation is not just an emotional consequence of trauma. It is a physiological one. A nervous system that has learned to associate closeness with threat generates the chemistry of danger in relational contexts. Even when the relationship is safe, the body preempts. It contracts before anything has happened because it learned in conditions it had no control over that opening was the prelude to harm. Healing asks you to bring those contractions into contact with a different experience. Someone who does not harm you when you open, who is still there when the session ends, who can tolerate your fear without becoming frightened themselves. That experience, repeated, is what slowly updates the nervous system's prediction, not the words spoken during it, the experience itself. Building that capacity back when it was damaged at the root is among the hardest things trauma recovery asks of a person. It requires tolerating closeness before closeness feels safe, which means tolerating the exact sensation the nervous system has been organized to avoid. Van der Kolk does not minimize this. What he does say is that the alternative, managing alone indefinitely, does not produce healing. It produces a kind of functioning that looks like coping from the outside and feels like surviving from the inside. And there is a difference between surviving what happened to you and actually being free of it. That freedom depends on one more thing: a brain that is capable of changing. And understanding how that change actually works is what makes the difference between waiting for it and actively creating the conditions in which it can happen. Nobody can undo what happened to you. Van der Kolk is explicit about this from the first pages of the book. What has happened cannot be undone. The imprint is real. The reorganization is real. Any approach to healing that begins with the promise of erasing the past is lying to you about what recovery actually is. But here is what van der Kolk did find, across decades of clinical work and brain scans and treatment trials. The imprint can be transformed, not removed, transformed. A nervous system that learned to live in permanent emergency can learn, through repeated experience, that the emergency is over. The amygdala that fires at shadows can be recalibrated, not silenced, but brought back into proportion. The window of tolerance that trauma compressed can be expanded, slowly, until more of life fits inside it. The body that became a place of danger can become, again, a place you are willing to live in. This is what healing from trauma actually looks like, not a return to who you were before. That person no longer exists, and trying to get back to them is a project organized around loss. The nervous system that trauma built is part of you now. The work is not to erase it. The work is to build alongside it. New circuits, new experiences, new evidence the body can take in that contradicts, at the level of sensation, what the worst moments of your life taught you to expect. You are not going backward. You are going somewhere you have never been. A version of yourself that can feel what is actually happening right now without being hijacked by what happened then. Van der Kolk ends his book not with a clinical protocol, but with a challenge. The question he leaves is not, have you processed your trauma? It is whether you are willing to give your nervous system what it actually needs. Not understanding, not the right narrative, not the perfect therapist. Experience. Tolerable, repeated, embodied experience that teaches the oldest parts of your brain that it is safe to be here. That the danger that shaped you is not the danger you are in now. That you are allowed to arrive in the present. That arrival is not a destination you reach once. It is something you practice. Every time you stay in your body one breath longer than yesterday. Every time you let someone close enough to regulate you, and they don't cause harm. Every time the alarm fires, and you meet it with something other than emergency. You are not broken. You are in the middle of the slowest and most necessary kind of learning there is. If this video helped you see yourself more clearly, type, "I am here now," in the comments. And if this video made sense to you, the one appearing on your screen right now will too. Click to keep watching.